the environment in which we operate, the context. And we overestimate the importance of the individual at the center of that, right? They're all versions of that argument in one way or another. And I believe this very strongly. And so I think of myself as being constructed from the outside in, not the inside out. So if you want to understand me, you should come to New York and talk to my friends, or you should go and look at the institutions that I came out with, or you should talk to my parents, or you should go to Jamaica and understand something about Jamaican brown skin culture, or there are all kinds of things that will give you enormous clues. But, you know, I'm not sure I can help you on the inner stuff, because I don't think, because I could tell you, I could give you a story about the inner stuff, and this actually goes to some of the stuff I discussed in Blink. We tell stories about ourselves all the time, and whenever we can fact check them, we discover they're almost entirely wrong. There's a beautiful book by a psychologist called Timothy Wilson called Strangers to Ourselves, and it was just about this very fact, that in many ways those around us know more about us than we do, because we are, our ability to look into our unconscious, which is really the source of much of what make us individual and distinctive, is severely limited. We can't look in the black box, you know. And I think it's important for us to kind of stop the charade of trying to pretend that we have perfect access to our innards. You know, we don't. And I think we should be comfortable with that fact.
But we have innards, and to some degree they are driving us.
Oh, absolutely.
And so what in your innards then drove you to dream up Outliers as your third book? Another difficult self-reflective moment coming up.
No, because it was I can tell you what was in my outards that led me to do that.
Go on then.
I mean, it was a simple. Well, a couple things came together. I had a very good friend whose father is a lawyer in New York, a very successful lawyer in New York, and she started to tell me about her father and her father's law partners, and they all had the same background, right? They were all the same age, the same ethnicity. They're all Jewish. They're all men. They all grew up in the boroughs of New York in the 30s and 40s. They went to the same public schools and the same colleges and the same law school, and their parents all did the same thing for a living, and their grandparents all came from the same part of Eastern Europe, right? So the question was, is that a coincidence, or is it meaningful? And the more I dug into it, the more I realized, actually, you know what? It's not a coincidence at all, that each one of those things, those aspects of their biography, contributed to their success. Some ways that are obvious, and in some ways that are not actually immediately obvious at all. And out of that came this idea that, oh, listen, this is interesting, because we're in a society that is obsessed with personal success. And our most, in America in particular, the way in which we choose to interpret that is to kind of valorize the individual. But here we have a case of success that appears to come out of a kind of ecology, a particular ecology. And that's was the germ of the book, that let's examine the ecology and not the individual. And it happens to be, since you want me to talk about my innards, that happens to be very consistent with the way I look at myself and the way that I was raised to think about success. It was a culturally familiar notion and friendly notion for me. And a very, I spent most of my formative years in Canada. It's a very Canadian notion as well. This is really a kind of Canadian book.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you say, on this point about the individual and society and the fact that it takes a village to raise a child, as Hillary Clinton would say, or it takes a community to raise a hero, as perhaps the Chinese would say. Or, there are many societies which would just glaze over and shrug at your idea that somehow it's the community and the very complex period of history, ethnic background, local environment, educational environment, etc., that makes someone succeed. And it's only, I suppose, in the United States where you could point to all these books which glorify individual effort. But if I can just rant on for a moment longer, arguably, all those books on the bookshelves in the United States are not there because sociologists think they're true, but they are there to motivate.
Yeah, that's probably. Well, I would say, just to respond a little bit, The premise of this book is not supposed to be revolutionary. This book begins with the cliché, right? With this kind of thing that we accept as, in most places of the world, as common sense. And what's interesting about the book is what is done with the cliché. I expect people to say, yes, I agree with this. And then, at that point, then we're all in agreement. Let's go on our journey. And let's discover that, in fact, this thing that we all take for granted, that it takes a village to raise a child, is actually complex and interesting and surprising in all kinds of ways.
Okay, give us an example of a way it's surprising and complex.
Well, so for example, the second half of the book is very interested in the role that culture plays. We all agree culture makes a difference. So one of the puzzles which I get into in part in the book is this question of why it is that Asian school children are so advanced relative to their Western counterparts. They outachieve us on almost every scale. And they do so, by the way, with far fewer resources. They spend way less on their schools than we do, particularly in America, but also here in England. And one of the reasons is that their classrooms are far more orderly, and that is the cultural lessons of respect for authority are beautifully played out in a classroom situation. And what they allow is for teachers to much more effectively and efficiently teach larger groups of children. Right? And we could learn so much from that.
We could talk about this for a lot longer, but we're out of time. Malcolm, what is the next Gladwellian idea, and where in your innards or your outards is it coming from?
Well, it's coming from my outards, as you know, and I have no idea what it is. I'm just writing for the New Yorker magazine again, which is my day job, and hopefully a book will emerge at some point. And
are people looking to you now? I mean, you modestly denied that you were some kind of guru, but you do have such an enormous following. Are people looking to you now for a bigger idea, for a more systemic theory of everything?
No, I don't think so. There is no such thing as a theory of everything. If there was, then we'd be out of business, wouldn't we? There'd be just one book would solve all the problems. So I'm hoping desperately that no one else comes up with a theory of everything, because I don't know what I'll have to do. Go and wash dishes or something.
Malcolm Gladwell, thanks so much for joining us on The Interview.
Thank you.
For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcast.